The history of anime on TV can basically be broken down into two big eras: pre-Evangelion and post-Evangelion. You see, before Neon Genesis Evangelion aired, there wasn't a whole plethora of original anime TV shows, especially not in the late-night broadcasting blocks. Most of the really original anime, as well as all of the niche stuff, the stuff aimed at otaku and older audiences, was being produced in OVAs, or films. TV anime was usually relegated to much longer series with much broader appeal. For instance, you had stuff like the World Masterpiece theater shows, each of which was a 50 or so episode adaptation of some piece of classic literature, usually from the West. These projects were the breeding ground of talents such as Hayao Miyazaki and the staff of Studio Ghibli. Then you had manga adaptations, usually of stuff with a pretty broad appeal. Sports anime from the 70s like Ashita no Joe, action mecha series like Mazinger Z, later a plethora of long-running shonen action series, hitting it big with Dragon Ball in the mid-80s, as well as long-form romantic comedies like the adaptations of Rumiko Takahashi's work like Urusei Yatsura and Ranma 1/2, the works of Mitsuru Adachi such as Touch. Generally, lots and lots of manga adaptations of manga that were usually already pretty popular. Some of these appealed to older audiences or to the whole family, but very rarely were these the niche otaku shows that proliferate anime today, with few exceptions. It could be said that even before Evangelion changed the face of anime, Mobile Suit Gundam had already done so in 1979, and Gundam did inspire a fair few imitators with a blossoming mecha and sci-fi genre in the 80s, but a majority of those were just other shows from Studio Sunrise, the studio who had created Mobile Suit Gundam. And as the 80s gave way to the 90s, fewer and fewer of those were serious, dark adult shows, and more of them were kids shows aimed at selling toys as they had been before Gundam, particularly when Sunrise was bought out by Bandai, and really became focused on mecha series for younger children, such as the Brave franchise. While we did get some interesting sci-fi series here and there, such as Super Dimensional Fortress Macross in the mid-80s, Irresponsible Captain Tyler in the early 90s, the latter being an adaptation of a novel series, it wasn't really until after Evangelion blew up that the doors were thrust open on not only original anime on television, with shorter runtimes in later time slots, but also more experimental anime aimed at a more niche and adult audience. Seriously, go on my anime list, go into the archive section of their seasonal charts, open up every year in the 90s. Before Evangelion's airing, you will see almost exclusively kids shows and manga adaptations. But then the second Evangelion hits the air, all of a sudden the second half of the 90s changes completely, but in a very slow and methodical manner. First, immediately following Evangelion is the series Escaflowne, an original anime series from Studio Sunrise once again, this one which tries to blend shoujo elements into a mecha fantasy series. Now, Escaflowne probably isn't as directly a result of Neon Genesis Evangelion. It was an original project which involved a lot of staff who had already been working on original projects with Sunrise up to that point, and would be a breeding ground for talent which would go on to create further original projects in the near future. But nonetheless, the fact that it comes right after Evangelion kind of signals the flood that is soon to come. Later that year is the first true successor to Neon Genesis Evangelion in the form of Martian Successor Nadesico. This is a mecha parody slash deconstruction anime, which seeks to take apart all of the tropes of old robot shows as well as the otaku-oriented media in general, and just pull it all apart and look at how it works before putting it back together. It's got a wacky, fun, dysfunctional cast of super cute girls, some really dark, unexpected turns throughout the narrative, and a crazy-ass ending. Granted, one that, like the end of Evangelion, seems truncated and unsatisfying, and was meant to be followed up with further media, which in this case, some of it got made, but not all. Following that, we have Revolutionary Girl Utena, which really seems to be an answer to Evangelion, but in the realm of shoujo magical girl anime. Utena was spearheaded by Kunihiko Ikuhara, who was good friends with Evangelion creator Hideaki Anno at the time. The two of them had worked together on some episodes of Sailor Moon, which Ikuhara had been the chief director of for the 3rd and 4th seasons. Ikuhara and his team, called Bae Papas, decided to break away from the studio that was creating dating Sailor Moon and decided to go work with JC Staff, whom, aside from Sunrise, was the only studio other than Neon Genesis Evangelion even attempting original TV anime in the 90s. They had produced Metal Fighter Miku just a year before Evangelion, which was a pretty standard girls' sports series, but with some weird and trippy visuals because of director Akiyuki Shinbo coming in late on the project. Revolutionary Girl Utena has many of the same intentions as Evangelion, but turned up to 11 with the visual factor, the densely laden themes and symbolism, and the obvious attempts at subversion all over the place. The creators were aiming to do everything that they had wished they could do with Sailor Moon and couldn't, and boy, they did everything they possibly could. The follow-up film, Revolutionary Girl Utena: Apocalypse of Adolescence, is often referred to as End of Utena in reference to its similarity to End of Evangelion. And while Utena feels like the most direct result of Evangelion's existence, we would very quickly start to see things open up and get crazy in 1998, once everybody had time to really let Evangelion settle in and decide to try and copy it. One series which doesn't really borrow much from Evangelion, but may very well have been allowed to exist because of the success of such a show, is Cowboy Bebop, a show that was created when Studio Sunrise told director Shinichiro Watanabe that he could basically do whatever he wants as long as it has some spaceships that they can sell toys of. So Watanabe creates one of the most eclectic, original, and memorable anime series of all time. Bear in mind, these series were also big successes. Martian Successor Nadesico and Cowboy Bebop also sold gangbusters, and Revolutionary Girl Utena has been extremely well remembered over time, itself having won several awards. But 1998 is where the floodgates really start to open, and not every one of these shows is as well remembered as Neon Genesis Evangelion and its first few successors. At this point, it's not only these hyper-talented visionary directors who are being given the reins to do whatever they want on these really great series. Now things are starting to get more experimental. Some very strange writers are getting hired, people who are known for their weird-ass bullshit. For instance, Sho Aikawa, who's put in charge of the series Neo Ranga, an utterly insane, batshit, balls-to-the-walls series, which starts off with 3 episodes of what is literally a Godzilla film, before it becomes about 3 young girls who have a pet kaiju that they use to solve Yakuza disputes and the housing crisis in Japan. This thing has tons of political commentary. It really goes all over the place in tone and is completely unpredictable. And Sho Aikawa would go on to write no shortage of batshit insane bullshit over the course of his career. Likewise, we would be introduced to Chiaki J. Konaka, who made his mark on the world with Serial Experiments Lain, a cult favorite series which makes up for its relative lack of production value with incredibly striking artwork and design, and especially sound design. But more importantly, its mind-altering perception of the internet and the upcoming singularity, which seemed way ahead of its time in 1998. Other less remembered shows which started that year are the likes of Gasaraki and Generator Gall, a mecha series and transforming hero series respectively, which feel a little bit more standard and anime-ish than the likes of Evangelion, but clearly take cues from it in terms of their presentation and the integration of more horrifying and trippy sci-fi elements into their plot. In 1999, we get Dual Parallel Adventure, a show which I haven't seen myself, but the only thing I've ever heard about it over the 17 years that I've been hearing about it is people saying that it's like a lighthearted take on Neon Genesis Evangelion. Depending on who you're asking, it's a not up its ass version, but you know how people are. A couple of the producers working at Studio Sunrise, who are in charge of the Brave franchise, remember that kids' toy line show, would take it in a very strange direction when they brought Gao Gaigar to an end, the final Brave series, and then gave it this crazy-ass OVA finale that completely goes into the realm of dark and insane. And this is right before setting another series in the same universe as the Brave series called Better Man, which is a straight-up sci-fi horror series that has nothing tonally to do with the Brave series in spite of sharing the same style of character design. And to start off 1999, we see The Legend of Black Heaven, a show with dogshit production values but a really interesting story about a washed-up old rock star come salaryman who's trapped in limbo between trying to relive his glory days and taking care of his wife and kid. Aside from its random breaks into complete wacky silliness that don't go over all that well, the series handles some shockingly mature themes with a character older than almost any other main character in anime ever, not to mention some badass guitar solos. If I have to mark the exact moment that the full impact of Evangelion's release really takes hold though, it would be in October of 1999. In this season, 4 different, very dark sci-fi series make their debut on television, each of them featuring characters who experience deep psychological trauma, really horrifying worldviews on the nature of humanity, and just plenty of carnage and violence in some cases. We have Now and Then, Here and There, which starts off looking like a shonen adventure series about a kid getting teleported to another world, until it turns out that this other world he's been teleported to is a horrifying dictatorship full of child slaves and soldiers, in which the main characters are essentially tormented and raped throughout the series. Then we have Blue Gender, a show about humanity coming out of cryogenic chambers to find the Earth completely ravaged by giant insects that kill everything, and which I remember primarily for the fact that so many of the main characters get eaten horrifically by giant bugs. Not to mention Infinite Revias, a show about a bunch of space cadets who end up abandoned on a ship out in the middle of space when all of the adults die, and they have to learn to form a society, which comes with no shortage of horrifying things that people do to one another, very often referred to as the Lord of the Flies in space. Not to mention Chiaki J. Kanaka returns once again with Big O, this one a sort of fusion of Batman with mecha that has lots of film noir trappings, and on a lighter note, Dygard, a mecha series in which the mech isn't really as important as the study of bureaucracy, an extremely adult-centric series considering that it's a mecha show. At this point in time, original anime got into full swing. Plenty of weird, eclectic original shows were hitting the air over the course of the next few years. Stuff like Nia Under 7, Brigadoon, Strange Dawn, Vandred, Argento Soma, Arjuna, The Daiichis, Noir, The Soul Taker, Gene Shaft, Figure 17, Shingu, Escryed. All of these debuted in 2000 and 2001. All of them were highly original series with varying levels of adult appeal. Some of them were completely out there and just totally full of weird ideas that they were getting to explore in this new expanded format of original TV anime, and others were a lot more anime-like and felt more like the OVAs of the 80s and 90s were just getting expanded into full TV shows now, whether or not they had been based on manga. If I had to pinpoint the apex of the Evangelion influence though, it would be with the series Razafon in 2002. Razafon has always been closely compared to Evangelion for good reason. My friend Ghostlightning made a whole post about all the direct parallels between the two shows as a response to people who were arguing that Razafon was somehow nothing like Evangelion, which is objectively not true. But in a way, Razafon reflects an attempt to do Eva again, but with a whole different crew of major talent. This was the first really major original project from Studio Bones, and it was a collaboration between many different writers and directors to make something extremely eclectic and out there in a mecha series. One that goes a step farther than Evangelion in being truly out there with its design sense, and with a narrative that really kind of plays second fiddle to the idea of just going crazy and experimenting with different episode styles. But by this point, the floodgates are just officially open. Original anime is a thing that we have now, and not even much of it is necessarily trying to copy elements from Evangelion. The people who made Evangelion have all moved on to work on future projects. The nature of most anime studios has completely shifted, with tons of new studios opening up and breaking away from one another at the turn of the century, and anime on TV is becoming a bigger and bigger deal as more and more shows get introduced every single season. Even the weirdest original anime feels less and less like it's directly trying to do what Eva did. Shows like Haibane Renmei, Wolf's Rain, Last Exile, and Technolize, which aired in 2003, all create their own completely unique worlds, while shows like Paranoia Agent, Ergo Proxy, and Noine over the next couple of years manage to explore these deeper psychological concepts and really out there plotlines without really feeling like Evangelion ripoffs. And in the meantime, a lot of more normal anime style is being brought to original anime. Shows like My Hime and Maho Shoujo Lyrical Nanoha that aired in 2004 play with completely different elements of the meta of anime, and would be bigger inspirations on the types of shows that were to come. But it wasn't just original anime which was following Evangelion's example over that decade. A lot of the stuff that was being adapted from manga and light novels was very clearly being adapted because of its similarities to Evangelion as well. And in fact, in some of these cases, the stories actually feel less Eva-like simply because they weren't actually being made in response to Evangelion, but were instead picked up because they could now be adapted to anime with shows like Eva being proven popular. It's hard to imagine we'd get stuff like the Berserk Berserk adaptation, something as baffling as Eat Man, Trigun, the first TV version of Bubblegum Crisis, Crest of the Stars, or Boogie Pop Phantom, which is less an adaptation of the book and more an original anime set in between the first two books of the series. By the time we get into the mid-2000s, with huge years for anime like 2006 and 2007, the engine of what anime will eventually become begins to perpetuate itself without any need for one huge breakout series to change everything. Every year, more and more shows are debuting, until eventually every season more and more shows are debuting, and the rise of the open internet and piracy starts spreading all kinds of different shows to a huge audience all around the world. There are no shortage of tentpole anime that you could point to for having massive influences over what was going to be popular in the next few years. The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya, Code Geass, Death Note, Sword Art Online, all of these are massively influential shows on the landscape of anime in the time after their airing. But nothing can be compared to the sheer magnitude of difference between what there was on TV before and after Neon Genesis Evangelion, especially in those first 5 to 10 years when everyone was really just trying to make that show again. I hope that you enjoyed this video and that you might go and check out some of the post-Eva shows if you happen to be a fan of shows like Evangelion. Most of the stuff that came out back then was pretty excellent. Martian Successor Nadesico, Revolutionary Girl Utena, Cowboy Bebop, these are all must-watch series, especially if you're a fan of the genres of the first two. And stuff like Neo Ranga, Serial Experiments Lane, Now and Then, Here and There, or Infinite Revias is very much worth watching to get a totally unique experience from anime that you just are not going to get today. Check all of that out, and while you're at it, check out my playlist of every YouTube video that I am featured in, because I show up on tons of different channels all over this website. And if you want to help me to make more videos like this, then consider donating to my Patreon, which is linked below and on screen. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.